She didn't say a word, but her body was already producing the world's most addictive drug. Louise Hay discovered this at 71, studying why intelligent men make completely irrational choices when certain women enter their lives. And what she found will destroy everything you believe about free will. Because there's a hidden chemical cocktail in your brain, 4 specific ingredients that, when combined in the right sequence, transform you into a biological slave. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, testosterone, 4 microscopic molecules that determine whether you'll be the predator or the prey. And today, you'll discover how some women activate this biological switch without even knowing they're doing it. Have you ever felt that sensation? When a woman enters the room and suddenly your brain just stops? When she looks at you a certain way and you feel an electric current running through your entire body? When she smiles and suddenly you do anything to see that smile again? That's not love at first sight, it's chemistry at first sight. Louise discovered that the male brain can be hacked in a matter of seconds through specific signals that trigger an automatic hormonal cascade. And when that happens, you're not yourself anymore. You're a collection of chemical reactions trying to get more of the drug she just gave you. Because it works like this. The exact moment you see a woman who activates your attraction receptors, your brain releases the first dose, pure dopamine, the same chemical released by cocaine, gambling, and social media, but at a concentration that can be 10 times more potent. And that first dose, it marks you forever. Louise studied men who spent decades chasing women who had marked them this way. Men who left wives, children, careers, for someone who activated this chemical cocktail just once. But here's what she discovered that's most disturbing. Dopamine is only the first ingredient. What comes next is what really hooks you. Because when you get her attention, when she finally reciprocates the interest, your brain adds the second ingredient to the mix. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone. The same chemical released between mother and baby, between partners during intimacy, between people who completely trust each other. And when dopamine combines with oxytocin in your system, something irreversible happens in your brain. You form what neuroscientists call a chemical imprint, a memory so deep it's etched into your emotional DNA. That's why you never forget your first true love, why you can meet someone after 20 years and still feel that thrill, why some people leave permanent marks on your soul. It's not magic, it's biochemistry. Louise realized that men who understood this mechanism had completely different relationships. They knew when they were being chemically manipulated and when they were genuinely connected. But most men, they live their entire lives as slaves to this recipe, without even knowing it exists. And here's where the story gets dark. Some women have learned to exploit this consciously. They know exactly how to release dopamine in men, how to create artificial oxytocin, how to activate the chemical cocktail that transforms rational men into desperate chasers, not necessarily out of malice, sometimes out of instinct, sometimes out of need, sometimes just because it works. But the result is always the same. You lose control over your own emotions. Louise discovered that there's a specific moment when this happens, a moment when you can literally feel the biological switch being flipped. It's when she does something you didn't expect, something that breaks your pattern of expectation, something that forces your brain to pay full attention. It could be an unexpected touch, a gaze that lingers too long, a phrase that catches you off guard, a behavior that contradicts your first impressions. At that exact moment, your brain interprets this as important information for survival and fires the first dose of dopamine. But here's the trick. She doesn't sustain that behavior. She gives the drug and then takes it away. Proximity followed by distance, interest followed by indifference, warmth followed by coldness. And this activates the third ingredient in the recipe, dysregulated serotonin. When you can't predict her behavior, when you don't know if you'll receive attention or rejection, your serotonin levels plummet, and low serotonin creates obsession, creates the desperate need to solve her mystery, creates the compulsion to try again until you get the next dose of dopamine. That's exactly how slot machines work. Intermittent rewards create a stronger addiction than constant rewards. Louise saw men destroy entire lives chasing that next dose, men who became shadows of themselves trying to decipher women who kept them in a state of chemical deprivation. And the cruelest part, the more they chased, the less attractive they became. Because there's a fourth ingredient in this recipe, the ingredient that determines whether you'll be respected or discarded: testosterone. And when you go into desperate pursuit mode, when you beg for attention, when you act like an addict in withdrawal, your testosterone levels plummet, and women sense this instinctively. They sense when a man is operating with low testosterone, and that triggers automatic biological repulsion. It's a cruel cycle. The more you want her, the less testosterone you have. The less testosterone you have, the less she wants you, until you become just another man orbiting around her, begging for crumbs of attention. Louise studied this pattern in hundreds of cases and discovered something that can save your sanity. There's a way to break this cycle, a way to keep your hormones balanced even when you meet a woman who triggers your brain chemistry. But first, you need to understand how the complete recipe works, how the four ingredients combine to create total dependence. Because when you know the formula, you can recognize when it's being used on you. And more importantly, you can use this same formula consciously. Louise discovered that men who mastered their own hormonal chemistry became irresistible to women because they operated from a place of chemical abundance, not scarcity. And chemical abundance is magnetic, especially to women who are used to controlling men through chemical deprivation, because suddenly they encounter someone who can't be manipulated, someone who has access to their own dopamine source, someone who doesn't need them to feel chemically complete. And that throws them completely off balance in the best possible way. Louise used to tell the story of Marcus, a 34-year-old engineer who spent 2 years obsessed with a colleague who played his hormones like a musical instrument. One day, she was affectionate and interested. The next, cold and distant. One day, she'd respond to messages in seconds. The next, she'd leave him hanging for days. Marcus had become a slave to her chemical cocktail, living on a constant hormonal roller coaster. Dopamine surging when she gave him attention, serotonin plummeting when she pulled away. Until the day he learned to control his own chemistry. Louise taught him to recognize when his biological switch was being flipped, to identify the moments when she was manipulating his hormones, to keep his testosterone high even when she tried to drain his energy. And most importantly, she taught him to activate his own dopamine, independent of her attention. Guess what happened? In 6 weeks, she was desperate for his attention, because for the first time in his life, he'd encountered a man who didn't dance to her chemical tune, a man who had complete control over his own hormonal responses. And that made her addicted to him, the same way he had been addicted to her. Louise explained, when you stop being hormonally predictable, when you stop reacting to her chemical triggers, you become a mystery, and mysteries activate dopamine. But there's something even more powerful than that. When you demonstrate complete chemical control, you activate what Louise called superior genetic recognition. The female brain perceives, this man can't be manipulated. He has control over his own biology. That's rare, that's genetically valuable, and genetic value is irresistible to any human brain, especially brains programmed to identify superior partners. Louise discovered that women who are used to controlling men through chemistry are completely lost when they encounter someone who can't be controlled that way. And that confusion, that inability to manipulate, transforms into obsession because suddenly they have to use real charm, real personality, real value, not just chemical games, and that forces them to become better versions of themselves. But here's what Louise discovered that was most surprising. The chemical cocktail works both ways. When you learn to control your own hormones, you automatically learn to activate hers, naturally, without manipulation, without games, just through balanced chemical presence. Louise realized that real attraction isn't about activating chemical dependence. It's about creating chemical resonance, hormonal harmony, mutual biological balance. And when two people operate this way, they create something that transcends chemistry. They create alchemy. But to reach that level, you first need to master your own internal recipe, your own hormonal ingredients. And Louise developed a specific protocol for this, a protocol she tested with hundreds of men over decades. The protocol begins with a disturbing discovery. Most modern men operate with chronic hormonal imbalance, dopamine addicted to external stimuli, oxytocin lacking real bonds, serotonin dependent on external validation. testosterone drained by stress and pornography. That's why you feel so vulnerable when a special woman appears. Your system is already in deficit. She only needs to offer a small dose, and you're hooked. Louise discovered that men with balanced hormones naturally attract women effortlessly because they radiate chemical abundance. And abundance is magnetic, but balanced hormones don't happen by chance. They are the result of conscious choices, a specific lifestyle, intentional daily practices, and protocols that most men never learn, because no one teaches you to be your own pharmacist for your hormones. Louise knew this sounded like science fiction. The idea that you can consciously control your brain chemistry, the idea that attraction is disguised pharmacology. But she had decades of evidence. Men who had completely transformed their love lives simply by mastering the 4 ingredients of the recipe. Self-generated dopamine through real purpose, oxytocin cultivated through authentic vulnerability, serotonin stabilized through genuine self-respect, testosterone optimized through constant physical challenge. And when you master these 4 pillars, when you become your own source of chemical balance, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing women to feel chemically whole, and you start wanting women to amplify a chemistry that's already abundant. And that difference between needing and wanting is the difference between dependence and magnetism, between being controlled by the recipe and controlling the recipe. Louise used to say, "The man who masters his own chemistry will never again be a slave to someone else's chemistry." And she was absolutely right, because when you finally understand that that sweeping passion isn't destiny, it's just unregulated neurochemistry, everything changes. Suddenly you realize you've spent years being manipulated by your own biology, years chasing people who only knew how to push your chemical buttons, years confusing addiction with love, dependence with devotion, neediness with passion, and then you laugh. You laugh at how naive you were, how you confused drugs with emotional nourishment. But it's not a bitter laugh. It's a laugh of liberation, because you finally understood the recipe. And when you understand the recipe, you stop being an ingredient in it. Louise discovered that men who master their hormonal chemistry have completely different relationships. Relationships based on conscious choice, not chemical compulsion. And women respond to this dramatically, because they finally found a man who can't be manipulated through chemical deprivation, a man who has access to his own source of hormonal satisfaction, who doesn't need external validation to keep his dopamine high, who doesn't panic when oxytocin fluctuates. That's irresistible to mature women and repulsive to women who feed on others' chemical dependence. Which means that when you balance your hormones, you automatically filter out toxic relationships and attract nourishing ones. It's like changing your chemical frequency. Suddenly, you only resonate with people operating at the same hormonal abundance. And these people create relationships that nourish instead of drain, that elevate instead of destroy, that heal instead of wound. But there's a final discovery from Louise that will revolutionize how you see attraction forever. A discovery about what really happens when 2 balanced hormonal systems meet. And this discovery will show you the deepest, darkest side of human chemistry. Because when you finally master your own hormones, when you become the pharmacist of your own brain chemistry, you develop something few men possess. You develop the ability to read anyone's hormonal state in seconds. Louise discovered this by studying men who had become masters of their own system. They could identify exactly which hormone a woman was trying to activate in them, and more disturbingly, they could do the same to her, in real time, without her even realizing it. Because when you understand the recipe, you recognize all the ingredients. You see when someone is operating with low dopamine, when they're deficient in oxytocin, when their serotonin is dysregulated, and then you can consciously choose to feed that deficiency or to not respond to it. Louise called this hormonal vision, the ability to see through someone's superficial personality and identify what's really happening in the chemical laboratory of their brain. And when you develop this vision, you realize something shocking about most human interactions. 90% of conversations are just one hormone trying to get another hormone. A deficient chemistry trying to suck up abundant chemistry. The woman who flirts excessively, low dopamine seeking external validation. The one who creates unnecessary drama, dysregulated serotonin trying to create artificial intensity. The one who constantly pushes and pulls, broken oxytocin system, unable to form real bonds. Louise realized that when you see this, when you see people as walking chemical systems, everything becomes transparent. You stop taking behaviors personally because you understand it's not about you, it's about her hormonal state, and this gives you immense power. The power to consciously choose how to respond instead of reacting automatically. Because here's the secret Louise discovered. You can influence anyone's hormonal state through your own chemical choices. When you operate with high dopamine, you activate dopamine in others. When you radiate genuine oxytocin, you stimulate oxytocin production. When your serotonin is stable, you calm down dysregulated nervous systems. It's chemical contagion, and it works automatically and unconsciously. Louise tested this with hundreds of men. She taught them to consciously calibrate their hormones before important interactions, and the results were always spectacular. Men who went into dates with balanced chemistry created completely different experiences. Women left feeling better about themselves, calmer, happier, more connected, not because they used seduction techniques, but because they offered real chemical nourishment. And chemical nourishment is addictive in the healthiest way possible. Louise discovered that there's a fundamental difference between hormonal manipulation and hormonal influence. Manipulation is when you create chemical deficiency to generate dependence. When you give and take away hormones to control behavior. Influence is when you offer genuine chemical abundance that permanently elevates the other person's hormonal state. And the difference between the two? One creates sickly addiction, the other creates real transformation. Louise saw men change women's entire lives just by consistently operating with balanced chemistry. Women who were anxious became calm. Women who were needy became independent. Women who were unstable became centered, not through therapy, through prolonged exposure to healthy hormonal systems, because the human brain learns through chemical imitation. When you spend time with someone who has balanced hormones, your own system tries to replicate that balance. It's neuroplasticity in action. Your brain literally rewires itself to produce the chemistry it senses in the environment. Louise realized this explains why some people make you feel good just by being around them, and why others drain your energy just by looking at you. It's not personality, it's chemistry. And when you finally master your own chemistry, you become one of those people who nourish others simply through presence. But Louise discovered something even deeper. She discovered that there's an advanced level of hormonal control that few men ever achieve. The level where you can activate specific hormones in specific sequences to create specific emotional experiences, like a conductor leading a chemical orchestra. Louise only taught this to her most advanced students, men who had already completely mastered their own system and were ready to learn conscious influence. Because this knowledge can be dangerous. In the wrong hands, it can be used for extreme manipulation, but in the right hands, it can create experiences of human connection that transcend anything the person has ever experienced. Louise called this hormonal alchemy, the art of combining complementary chemistries to create elevated states that neither could achieve alone. It's when 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 10. And when you experience real alchemy, when you feel what it's like to be in total chemical resonance with another person, you never again settle for relationships based on deficiency. Because you've proven that something infinitely better exists, something most people don't even know is possible. Louise used to say that 99% of relationships are based on chemical deficit, two needy people trying to suck chemistry from each other. But 1% of relationships are based on chemical abundance, two whole people choosing to mutually amplify their already balanced chemistry. And the difference between these two types of relationships, it's the difference between survival and transcendence. But to reach that level, you first need to become an absolute master of the 4 ingredients of the recipe. And Louise developed specific protocols for each of them. Protocols she refined over decades working with high-performing men. The dopamine protocol, how to create genuine internal satisfaction that doesn't depend on external validation or artificial stimuli. Louise discovered that most men have dopamine receptors completely desensitized. Pornography, social media, video games, processed food, it all artificially hyperstimulates dopamine. The result? You need increasingly larger doses of stimulation to feel pleasure. And natural experiences, like talking to a real woman, can no longer compete with the artificial intensity your brain has become accustomed to. Louise taught men how to do a dopamine reset. Specific periods of total deprivation from artificial stimuli to resensitize the receptors, and then protocols to generate natural dopamine through real achievement, physical challenges, creative projects, goals that demand real effort and produce genuine satisfaction. When you rebuild your dopamine system this way, you become magnetic naturally because you radiate genuine satisfaction, and satisfaction is contagious. The Oxytocin protocol: how to develop the capacity for real bonding without becoming emotionally dependent. Louise discovered that many men confuse neediness with connection. They think needing someone is the same as loving someone, but real oxytocin can only be produced from chosen vulnerability, not desperate need. Louise taught men to distinguish between the two, to develop the courage to open themselves emotionally without becoming energetically dependent. And this requires a specific skill: the ability to feel deeply without losing your center, to connect intensely without dissolving into the other person. It's mature oxytocin, and mature oxytocin creates bonds that nourish instead of drain. The Serotonin protocol: how to maintain emotional stability independent of other people's reactions. Louise discovered that men with low serotonin are slaves to the emotions of others. Their partner's mood dictates their mood. External validation determines their self-worth. This creates codependent relationships where you never know who you are, because you're always a reflection of how others see you. Louise taught men to cultivate genuine self-respect, not arrogance, not superiority, but an unshakable sense of self-worth that doesn't fluctuate based on external circumstances. And when you develop this, when your serotonin becomes internally stable, you become an emotional rock, calm in the storm, centered in chaos. And emotional stability is irresistible to people who have lived their entire lives on an emotional roller coaster. The testosterone protocol: how to maintain high masculine energy without becoming aggressive or domineering. Louise discovered that most modern men have chronically low testosterone. Stress, poor diet, lack of physical challenge, excess comfort. Low testosterone creates men who don't inspire respect, who are easily manipulated, who avoid conflict and confrontation even when necessary. But high testosterone without wisdom creates toxic aggression, domination, control. Louise taught men to calibrate testosterone through conscious challenge, combat sports, weightlifting, projects that demand courage, situations that force you to face fear, and more importantly, how to channel that energy constructively, how to be assertive without being aggressive, how to lead without dominating. When you balance testosterone this way, you develop a natural magnetic presence. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, because your energy speaks for itself. Louise realized that when a man masters these 4 protocols, when he becomes truly chemically balanced, something extraordinary happens. He stops attracting people based on neediness and begins attracting people based on resonance, not people who need fixing, not people who want to fix him, but people who are already whole and want to create something bigger together. And when 2 whole people meet, when 2 balanced hormonal systems resonate, they create what Louise called an amplified chemical field, a state where both experience levels of satisfaction, connection, stability, and energy that neither could achieve alone. It's like 2 perfectly tuned musical instruments playing in harmony. The result transcends the sum of its parts. Louise saw couples create this alchemy, and they became magnetic to other people too, because they radiated a type of chemistry that most have never experienced. People wanted to be around them just to feel what it's like to be in this amplified energy field. But Louise also discovered the dark side of this knowledge. When you understand human chemistry at this level, when you can consciously read and influence hormones, you develop immense power. And power always tests character. She saw men use this knowledge for extreme manipulation, to create chemical dependency in women, to exploit hormonal vulnerabilities for their own benefit. And it always ended in destruction, because chemical manipulation creates sick addictions, and sick addictions always eventually implode. Louise taught that true power isn't in controlling the chemistry of others. It's in being so chemically balanced that you naturally elevate others to your level, not through techniques, through genuine presence. And when you operate from that place, when you become a source of real chemical nourishment, you naturally attract people who value emotional health, and you naturally repel people who feed on drama and instability. It's an automatic filter that protects your energy and attracts only connections that add real value to your life. Louise used to say, "The man who masters his chemistry never has to chase love. Love chases him." And she was absolutely right, because when you become a stable source of balanced dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and testosterone, you become irresistible completely naturally, not because you're trying to seduce, but because you're offering something that 99% of people have never experienced, truly healthy human chemistry. And that is the most powerful aphrodisiac there is. More powerful than looks, more powerful than money, more powerful than status, because it touches something deeper than superficial desire. It touches the primal need of every human being to feel good about themselves. And when you can make someone feel genuinely good about themselves, when you elevate their chemical state simply through your presence, you create an indelible impression, an impression that she never forgets, and that she always wants to experience again. But Louise made one final discovery that revolutionizes everything. A discovery about identifying women capable of real chemical alchemy and those who are merely hormonal vampires in disguise, because not everyone is ready for chemical abundance. Some people are addicted to deficiency, and when you offer real satisfaction to an addict of dissatisfaction, they reject it. Louise developed specific tests to identify this difference, ways to quickly know if someone is ready for chemical growth or if they'll try to drag you back to scarcity. And these tests can save years of your life, because it's no use having balanced chemistry if you keep investing energy in people incapable of chemical reciprocity. Louise taught men to be selective, generous with energy but strategic with investment, to offer chemical abundance freely, but only deepen connection with those demonstrating real capacity for growth. And when you finally find someone operating at the same chemical level, when you find someone who not only receives your abundance, but contributes their own, you experience something Louise called chemical transcendence, a state where both become elevated versions of themselves through mutual resonance. And in this state, you don't just love each other, you transform each other. You evolve together. You create something greater than the sum of your parts. Louise said this was the real purpose of human relationships, not just companionship, not just satisfaction, but mutual evolution through conscious alchemy. And now you have the tools to create this, the complete map of human chemistry, the recipe for transforming deficiency into abundance, dependence into magnetism, reaction into conscious choice, because in the end you realize it was always about chemistry. Every passion, every rejection, every obsession, every love, but now you're no longer a victim of that chemistry. You are its master, and masters of their own chemistry. Masters never remain alone, because they become magnetic to other masters. And when masters meet, they create magic, not the magic of desperate deficiency, but the magic of conscious abundance. The magic of two perfect systems choosing to create something even more perfect together. And that is the true recipe for love. Not 4 ingredients creating dependence, but 4 balanced ingredients creating transcendence. The difference between being controlled by the recipe and being the chef of your own alchemy. And now you know the difference forever.